Want to expand the reach of your content? Start a podcast. Feature industry experts on your show and leverage the influence and reach of your guests to grow your brand. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Chris Finneral. He is the co-founder and CEO at SketchDeck. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Logan. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us. I am excited to talk about scaling design to drive growth with you today. And you guys have developed some frameworks that I think are going to be very helpful for marketers and teams as they think about this concept. But before we jump straight into that, Chris, I would love for you to give folks a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the team at SketchDeck are up to these days.
Sure. So I'm actually from the UK originally, as you can probably tell. My background originally was in engineering, and then I spent some time in startups and also in the consulting world. So worked quite a lot from a kind of business side of things early on in my career. I started SketchDeck back in the UK actually about 5.5 years ago now. And it came from this pain point of wanting to work with designers, appreciating the importance of design, but really finding that very hard to do. Like the traditional solutions like agencies and freelancers were just very hard to work with. They wanted to come up with something which would make design work better for most people, especially in business settings. So kind of fast forwarding to what SketchDeck is today, we are a software-powered design service, and we very much focus on what we call everyday design needs. So these are the needs which go on, hundreds of times every week, every month in an organization. It's things like the presentation that you're giving, the social media ads that want to get put out, the reports, the white papers, content marketing. It's the hundreds of smaller pieces of design work that happen to really power especially marketing teams of organizations. And we've taken a unique approach of combining both a software platform plus a distributed global design team to really bring a service which gets those everyday design needs taken care of in a fast and efficient way. And yeah, that's what we've been working on with SketchDeck now for the last 5 years.
I love it. I love it. And it seems like, with that context, that makes a lot of sense, Chris, why you're the guy talking about, how organizations can scale their design needs. And we're going to talk a little bit about how people can segment out their different design needs. Before we get really into that, I think we should talk about, the importance of design and how that has evolved, especially in B2B marketing, as most of our listeners are in that space, leading B2B marketing teams or contributing on those teams. Tell us a little bit about where you've seen the evolution in the past few years.
Sure. So, design is obviously a field that's been around for a long time, but if you go back, 10 or so years, design was always a focus of B2C companies. It was of course seen as essential for anything you wanted to sell to consumers. Things like the rise of the iPhone and Apple and things like that were just kind of cemented the importance of design in building emotional connections with consumers and hence driving revenue and growth for those companies.
Absolutely.
What we've seen over the last 10 or so years now is that this expectation of high quality design is now also in the B2B world. My personal belief on this is that it's many of the millennials who've grown up being the consumers of good design through their childhood and teenage years now are, dominant in the workplace, and like those expectations that they had when they were buying B2C products, that, these people are now the decision makers of B2B decisions. So they're taking that same judgment that they used earlier in their lives now to apply to the B2B companies they want to work with. So it's really grown in importance, the kind of the need for good design. And furthermore, there's been growing research in this field as well. There's a lot of pieces that are coming coming out from various publications and organizations. There's an Envision report that came out recently that I really recommend to people, but also there was a McKinsey report that came out maybe half a year ago now that talks about the value of business in design. And they have some nice charts in that report that looks at companies that prioritize design and invest in design versus a kind of a baseline. And they saw things like, the revenues of those companies that prioritize design, significantly outperforming those that don't prioritize design. And this was even, they did some studies across very wide-ranging industries, including things like financial services and oil and gas, things that you would never really think should care about design. They still saw meaningful performance improvements when companies prioritize design versus those that did not. So, there's starting to be a growing body of evidence that design actually leads to kind of real business outcome improvements as well.
Yeah, I think that correlation and the broader reach of that correlation is important to point out, because I think a lot of us, especially maybe if you're a SaaS company in the MarTech space and you're marketing to marketers, then obviously, good design is going to be important because you're marketing to marketers who care about that. But, oil and gas, financial services, other sectors that are seeing that same correlation to good design and revenue growth and other performance indicators, I think is somewhat enlightening. And what you also touched on there, Chris, a lot of guests on this show have talked about how B2C experiences are influencing our B2B sales and marketing strategies and buying habits and things like that. And we've talked about, the customer journey, ease of access of information, a frictionless experience, handoff from sales to marketing. But I don't think we've really touched on it when it comes to design, but we've seen that same aspect, B2C influencing B2B, because at the end of the day, we're all people. We interact with B2C brands. We're making decisions when we go to the office, and those things don't just stop when we walk in the door. We still are a human, and we're interacting with Amazon and these other B2C brands on a regular basis. So that totally makes sense. Chris, what I'd like to talk about next, or have you share with us, is some challenges that you guys have seen with organizations in scaling their design needs. What are some of the main hurdles that you see people running into if they realize, hey, good design has great benefits, but there's some hurdles getting them from the why to executing on that?
Yeah. So what we normally start with here actually is we kind of introduce a little framework to help break down this amorphous large thing that's called design into some things that are a bit more practical. So we've actually got a blog post and white paper coming out on this in the next few weeks. So we think of this in the context of a design pyramid. So in that pyramid, we have three layers that we've kind of broken up. The very top of that pyramid, which represents the kind of highest scale, most visible, but smallest in quantity activities, is what we see as a company's brand identity. What does this company look and feel like? It's the piece that, a large enterprise would go to the top design and branding agencies in the world and spend, $1 million or a few $1 million having them work on for them. It's the piece that defines your logo, your colors, your look and feel, all of those pieces. That's what we think of at the very top of the pyramid. And by and large, actually, we see that piece is done generally quite well. Most, especially large companies, seem to have a strong brand identity at that level. And there's lots of great partners out there that can help with that. The next layer down is what we think of as the flagship or major campaign. And these are things like big ad runs that are done on TV, Super Bowl ads. It might be branding on the front of a store if we're in kind of like in a B2C setting. The website and the various pages for obviously for every company, maybe a mobile app, things like that. The kind of most prominent campaigns that companies have occupy this middle section. But this bottom section is a section which I think often people forget about, but actually is incredibly important. And this is what we actually think of as everyday design. And this is the stuff which is going on most frequently. This is the stuff that like almost anyone in your organization who is interacting with the outside world, either through maybe a sales function, a business development function, or through a marketing function, like almost everything that gets created has some visual form. And this is the most numerous in terms of volume of work. But each individual piece is not that visible. If you compare that to the homepage of a website, that one piece of collateral is not being seen very much. But if you sum up the total number of things like that being produced, it's incredibly, incredibly visible. So when I come back to the topic of scaling design, it's really firstly important to focus on which part of this pyramid you need to act in. So scaling design at the very top of the pyramid actually isn't too applicable. Like you don't need to scale the brand itself that much. Like that's normally pretty well taken care of, especially now as many branding agencies, as well as creating brands, are also creating nice scalable brand systems that other parts of the pyramid can use. So scaling design we don't need to focus on that piece too much. It's really those second two layers down where it starts to apply. And what we see here is that for that middle section, it's really about making sure companies have like a range of different providers that they can work with. So they have, typically we find that they'll want to have an in-house team for some components, but then they'll want to have some agencies that they partner with there. And that often works well for those type of flagship type activities. The piece at the bottom there is where, transparently is where we feel like we come in and play. And, my biased opinion, of course, is that we support people well there. But if you don't work with us, you just need to think about, like, first of all, how can you get design out to all of those people who are demanding it? Because what we see some organizations do is they basically just ignore that piece. They're like, it's too big. We're not going to touch it. If you do that, you're basically accepting that you've got non-designers, you've got salespeople, you've got marketing people, business development people, basically creating things, trying to emulate your brand. And then that is getting out into the world. And there are hundreds and thousands of cases of that which get out there. So you need to do something. And, there's different ways. Some companies have tried building out their own freelance networks. That is an approach as well. It takes a lot of kind of time and effort to make that work, but that can work well. Or of course, that's an area as well that we talk to clients about all the time and really can help them scale out that bottom component there too.
Yeah. I love what you're saying here, Chris. And I love the visual aspect of the design triangle, this 3-part framework to look at all of your design needs. You've got, the brand at the top, you've got your flagship campaigns, and then you've got everyday design, the volume of stuff that is still impacting the perception of your brand on a day-to-day basis. And I've been on teams where, that everyday design, as you mentioned, was handled by marketing and even, salespeople who need to get things out and don't necessarily have an easy spot to go to. So some of the things that you're talking about, I've seen played out in other roles that I've been in for sure. So what are some of the other things that you think, Chris, people should be thinking about in how to apply this concept to be more efficient and effective as they tackle their design demands? Is it really looking at, okay, a project comes in, or this is a recurring theme, thinking about which bucket does it fall in and then assigning appropriately?
Yeah, we always suggest it's first good to just take stock of what's going on inside your organization right now. Depending on the size of organization, it can be easier or harder. If you're, a small kind of 5 to 10 person organization, you probably, if you're head of marketing there or a founder there, like you probably have a good sense of the things going on. So just take a little while just to look through what's gone out over the last 2 or 3 months, and you'll get a good feel for what's going on. If you're in a larger organization, one of the first challenges is that often a head of marketing doesn't know all the stuff that's going on. So it's important for that person to speak to their team, especially lower down in the organization, and identify what stuff is being created on a regular basis and really understand what the needs of your organization are. That's always the first place to begin. Then, I find it helpful to actually use that same design pyramid to really break things down, like categorize those, 10 or 100 or 1,000 things which you see going out into these different categories, and just really asking yourself, like, do we have a good solution for this part? Yes or no? If not, like, then start to evaluate what the good options are. And, that kind of diagnosis, stage at first is always a great place to start, because at least you know what you're working with, and you actually are consciously making a choice to do something or not, as opposed to kind of just ignoring it and then pretending that nothing is going on there. So that's always where I recommend people begin before thinking about where they want to go from there.
Yeah. As they say, accepting there's a problem is the first step towards fixing it, or maybe not even a problem, but accepting the reality rather than just ignoring it, right?
Yes, Yes.
I love it. Well, Chris, this has been a fantastic conversation. I appreciate this framework that you're giving to people as I saw this in a piece of collateral that you shared with me. And as we've talked about it here and offline, it really makes sense to me. If folks listening to this would like to ask some questions of you on scaling their design needs and meeting that growing demand within their team, or talk with you about any other subject, what's the best way for them to reach out, learn more about SketchDeck, or get in touch with you?
Yeah, there's a few ways. So I think you'll share in the show notes my LinkedIn, so you're welcome to come and drop me a message through there. Happy to respond personally to anyone that reaches out. If you've got more kind of general curiosity about what we're doing at SketchDeck, then our website, sketchdeck.com, is the best place to go. There's a Get Started page that gives you various options to either try a project, talk to one of our team, and actually our blog, sketchdeck.com/blog. That's got lots of interesting articles on topics like this and more. And we're actually hoping to get a more in-depth white paper on this very topic we've discussed today coming out in the next few weeks. So check back there, and then you'll hopefully see that article, and you can read in more detail there.
I love it. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been a fun conversation, man.
Thanks, Logan.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.